They called him the crazy hermit, the man who lived in $100 cabin at the edge of nowhere. But when that cabin's floor finally opened, what came to light wasn't madness. It was $450 million worth of the world's most precious stolen art, and a secret that would expose the most powerful men in the country. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind cut across the Montana plains like a blade, sharp and unforgiving, the kind of cold that made your bones ache and your breath freeze in the air. It was early November, and the town of Crestfall sat huddled beneath grey skies, population 873, though that number had been slowly shrinking for years. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were supposed to be impossible, where gossip travelled faster than the internet ever could. But there was one man nobody really knew. They thought they did. They thought they had him all figured out, but they were wrong. Marcus Wilhelm lived in a cabin so small it looked like it might blow away in a strong wind. The structure sat on 12 acres of scrubland at the far edge of town, past the abandoned grain mill, past the rusted water tower, past the point where most people bothered to drive. The cabin itself was a patchwork of weathered wood and mismatched shingles, no bigger than a garden shed, really. Smoke occasionally curled from a crooked chimney. A single window faced the road, curtains always drawn. There was no car in the driveway, no satellite dish, no signs of modern life. Just a man, alone, in a box of wood that shouldn't have been able to keep anyone warm through a Montana winter. People in Crestfall had been calling Marcus the crazy hermit for as long as anyone could remember. The kids were the cruelest. They'd ride their bikes out to the edge of his property and throw rocks at the cabin, daring each other to get closer, laughing when Marcus would step onto the porch and just stand there, silent, watching them with those pale grey eyes that never blinked, never showed anger, just a deep, unreadable sadness. The adults weren't much better. At the general store, they'd whisper when he came in to buy his supplies: canned soup, dried beans, coffee, nothing fresh, nothing that required refrigeration. He paid in cash, exact change, counted out slowly from a worn leather wallet. He never made small talk, never smiled, just nodded once and left. Sheriff Boyd Kerrigan had run Marcus's name through the system more than once, looking for warrants, priors, anything that might justify the unease people felt around him. But there was nothing. Marcus Wilhelm, 68 years old, no criminal record, no outstanding debts, no family, no history. It was like he'd appeared out of nowhere 26 years ago, bought that plot of land for next to nothing, and decided to disappear into it. Some folks said he was a veteran who'd lost his mind overseas. Others claimed he was running from something, maybe the law, maybe a broken heart. A few whispered darker theories, that he'd done something unforgivable and chosen exile over prison. But nobody knew for sure, and after a while, nobody cared to know. He became part of the landscape, like the mountains in the distance or the cracked asphalt on Route 19. Just there, always there, ignored. Marcus's routine never changed. Every morning, just after dawn, he'd step out of his cabin wearing the same clothes: faded canvas work pants, a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar, a grey wool coat that hung loose on his thin frame, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He'd walk the perimeter of his property, slow and deliberate, checking fence posts, clearing fallen branches, moving with a precision that seemed almost military. His posture was too straight for a man his age, his movements too controlled, like someone who'd spent a lifetime being watched and had learned to reveal nothing. After his morning walk, he'd tend to a small garden plot behind the cabin. Even in winter, he'd be out there turning soil, checking for frost damage, preparing for the next season. He grew tomatoes, peppers, squash, things that shouldn't have thrived in Montana's harsh climate, but somehow did under his care. He never sold the produce, never gave it away, just canned it himself and stored it somewhere inside that impossibly small cabin. By afternoon, he'd disappear inside, and the only sign of life would be the smoke from his chimney, thin and steady, like a signal to no one. Occasionally, people passing by would see him through the window, bent over something on a table, working with his hands. Some said he was building model ships, others claimed he was writing, but nobody had ever been inside to know for sure. There was one person in Crestfall who didn't treat Marcus like a ghost or a punchline. Her name was Sarah Donovan, and she was 34 years old with 2 kids, a mountain of medical bills, and a spine made of something stronger than steel. She worked double shifts at Millie's Diner on Main Street, pouring coffee and serving pie to the same faces day after day, smiling through exhaustion because tips paid for her daughter's asthma medication and her son's school supplies. Her ex-husband had left 3 years ago, chasing oil work in North Dakota and leaving behind nothing but a rusted truck and a pile of broken promises. Sarah had seen Marcus a handful of times at the diner. He'd come in maybe once every 2 months, always alone, always sitting in the back booth by the restrooms where nobody bothered him. He'd order black coffee and oatmeal, nothing else. He'd leave exact change on the table, folded neatly under the salt shaker. No tip, not because he was cheap, but because he seemed to calculate everything down to the penny, like he was rationing his life $1 at a time. The other waitresses refused to serve him. They'd make excuses, claim they were swamped, nudge Sarah to take the table. She didn't mind. In fact, she was the only one who spoke to him like he was human. "Good morning," she'd say. "Cold out there today, huh?" He'd nod. Sometimes he'd murmur a quiet, "Yes, ma'am." His voice was rough, unused, like gravel shifting in a riverbed, but there was something in his eyes when she spoke to him, a flicker of gratitude, of recognition, like he'd forgotten what it felt like to be acknowledged. One evening in late November, Sarah's life collided with Marcus's in a way neither of them expected. She'd finished her shift just after 9, her feet aching, her back stiff from hours of balancing trays and forcing smiles. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and snow was starting to fall, soft and silent, coating the world in white. She climbed into her old Buick, a 1998 sedan with 230,000 miles on it, and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. She turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. She tried again. Nothing. She slammed her hands against the steering wheel and let out a frustrated breath that fogged the windshield. Her phone was at 8% battery. Her kids were with her mum, but her mum's house was 12 miles away, and there was no way she was walking that in a snowstorm. She tried the engine one more time. It turned over weakly, then gave up completely. Sarah grabbed her phone and called the only mechanic in town, Eddie Farris. It went straight to voicemail. She tried the sheriff's office. Closed. She scrolled through her contacts, desperate, but there was no one. No one she could ask for help at this hour without feeling like a burden. She sat there in the dark, snow piling up on the windshield, and for the first time in months, she let herself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, exhausted tears that came from a place too deep to name. Then, a knock on the window. She jumped, heart pounding. Through the snow-streaked glass, she saw a figure in a grey coat and wide-brimmed hat. Marcus. He stood there, still as a statue, his breath visible in the freezing air. She hesitated, then rolled down the window a crack. "You need help," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. "My car won't start," she admitted. Marcus nodded once. "Pop the hood." She pulled the lever, and he moved to the front of the car, lifting the hood with ease despite his age. She watched him through the windshield, his movements precise and practiced, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. He checked the battery terminals, tested the starter, examined the alternator. After a few minutes, he closed the hood and returned to her window. "Alternator's gone," he said. "Won't start tonight." She felt her chest tighten. "I don't have money for a tow," she said quietly. "I can barely afford the part." Marcus studied her for a moment, those grey eyes unreadable. Then he said, "I'll take you home." She blinked. "What?" "I've got a truck," he said, nodding toward the far end of the parking lot. "Old Ford, parked in the shadows. I'll take you home." Sarah hesitated. Every warning she'd ever heard about Marcus flashed through her mind. The rumors, the whispers, the way people crossed the street to avoid him. But then she looked at his face, really looked at it, and saw nothing threatening. Just a tired old man offering help. Okay, she said. Thank you. He led her to the truck, a 1987 Ford F-150 that looked like it had been maintained with obsessive care. The paint was faded but rust-free. The interior was spotless. He opened the passenger door for her, waited until she was seated, then closed it gently before walking around to the driver's side. The engine started on the first turn, smooth and strong. He drove carefully, slowly, wipers clearing the snow from the windshield in rhythmic sweeps. They didn't speak at first. Sarah gave him directions, and he followed them without question. But as they turned onto the rural highway that led toward her mother's house, the silence began to feel less uncomfortable and more companionable. Thank you for this, Sarah said. You didn't have to. He kept his eyes on the road. You've always been kind, he said. His voice was still rough, but there was something softer beneath it now. Seemed right to return it. She glanced at him, surprised. You remember me? Of course, he said. You're the only one who talks to me like I'm still here. Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say to that. They drove another mile in silence before she asked, Why do you live the way you do? Out there, alone, I mean. People talk. He nodded slowly. I know what people say. Doesn't make it true. Then what is true? She asked. He was quiet for a long time, so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, finally, he said, I made a choice a long time ago. To protect something, to keep it safe until the world was ready. She frowned. Keep what safe? He didn't answer. They'd reached her mother's driveway. He pulled up to the house, put the truck in park, and turned to look at her for the first time since they'd started driving. Someday, he said, if you're willing to listen, I'll tell you, but not tonight. Sarah studied his face, searching for deception, for danger, but found only honesty. Okay, she said. Someday. He nodded. She climbed out of the truck, then leaned back in before closing the door. I owe you one, she said. He shook his head. No, ma'am. You already paid it, every time you smiled. And with that, he drove away, disappearing into the snow like a ghost. The next morning, Sarah woke to find her Buick parked in her mother's driveway, engine running, a note tucked under the wiper blade. The handwriting was precise, almost calligraphic. Alternator replaced. Battery terminals cleaned. Should run fine now. No charge. M. She stood there in her pajamas and coat, snow falling around her, staring at the note until her fingers went numb. Inside the car, everything looked exactly as she'd left it, except the engine purred like it was brand new. At the diner that afternoon, she asked Eddie Farris how much a new alternator cost. $250, he said, plus labor. Another $120. She did the math. Marcus had spent nearly $400 on her car and hadn't asked for a penny. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or guilty. That evening, she drove out to his cabin, a casserole dish warm in her hands. It was the least she could do. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, and the cabin looked even smaller against the vast emptiness of the plains. She knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Marcus, it's Sarah. I brought you dinner. To say thank you. The door opened a crack and Marcus peered out, his expression guarded. You didn't need to do that, he said. I know, she replied, but I wanted to. He hesitated, then opened the door wider, accepting the dish with both hands. Thank you, he said quietly. She smiled. You're welcome. She turned to leave, then paused. Marcus, if you ever need anything, you let me know, okay? He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he nodded. Okay. As Sarah drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that she'd crossed an invisible line, stepped into a story she didn't yet understand. She didn't know it then, but that casserole, that small act of kindness, had just changed the course of both their lives forever. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Sarah's unlikely friendship deepened. She'd stop by his cabin once a week, always with food, soup, bread, leftovers from the diner. He'd accept them with quiet gratitude, sometimes inviting her to sit on the porch for a few minutes, sometimes not. They'd talk about small things, the weather, her kids, the town gossip he pretended not to care about. He never talked about himself, and she never pushed. But she noticed things. The way his hands moved when he worked, steady and skilled, like a craftsman. The way he spoke, formal and precise, like someone educated far beyond what his life suggested. The way he looked at the horizon sometimes, like he was seeing something no one else could. Then, just after Christmas, everything changed. Marcus collapsed. It happened at the general store on a Wednesday morning. He'd been reaching for a can of soup on the top shelf when his legs gave out. He went down hard, his head cracking against the linoleum floor. The store owner, Gary Pitts, called 911, and within minutes, the ambulance was screaming through town. Sarah heard about it from her manager at the diner. She dropped everything and drove straight to the hospital. Marcus was unconscious when they brought him in, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Sarah sat in the waiting room for 3 hours before a doctor finally came out. "Are you family?" the doctor asked. She hesitated. "I'm all he has," she said. It wasn't exactly a lie. The doctor sighed. "He's stable, but we found something during the scan. A mass, in his lungs, advanced stage." She felt the floor tilt beneath her. How advanced? The doctor's expression said everything. Months, maybe weeks. "Does he know?" Sarah asked. "Not yet," the doctor said. "We'll tell him when he wakes up. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more." When Marcus woke, Sarah was sitting beside his bed. His eyes focused slowly, and when he saw her, something like relief crossed his face. "You came," he murmured. "Of course I came," she said, taking his hand. "Marcus, the doctor's found something." He closed his eyes. "I know, I've known for a while." "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice breaking. He looked at her, those grey eyes tired but clear. "Because saying it makes it real, and I wasn't ready for it to be real." The doctors kept him for 2 days, running tests, confirming what they already knew. Cancer, stage 4, inoperable. They offered chemotherapy, but Marcus refused. "I've lived long enough," he told Sarah. "I'm not spending my last days sick in a hospital." She wanted to argue, to fight, to demand he try, but she saw the resolve in his eyes and knew it would be pointless. When they released him, she drove him back to his cabin. He was silent the whole way, staring out the window like he was memorizing the landscape. She helped him inside, and for the first time she saw the interior of his home. It was nothing like she expected. The cabin was small, yes, but immaculate. Everything had a place. A narrow cot in one corner, military tight. A small wood stove. A table with a single chair. Shelves lined with books, old hardcovers with cracked spines. Titles in languages she didn't recognize. And tools. Precise, expensive tools hung on pegboards, organized by size and function. It didn't look like the home of a crazy hermit. It looked like the workshop of someone who valued order above all else. "Sarah," Marcus said, sitting on the edge of his cot, "there's something I need to tell you." She sat in the chair facing him. "I'm listening." He took a long breath, like he was preparing to carry a weight he'd held alone for too long. 26 years ago, he began, I worked for the United States government, Art Recovery Division. It was a small unit, classified. Most people didn't even know it existed. Our job was to track down stolen cultural artifacts, paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, things taken during wars by thieves, by corrupt officials. We'd find them, authenticate them, and return them to their rightful owners or museums. Sarah listened, barely breathing. "I was good at my job," Marcus continued. "Maybe too good. I recovered pieces worth millions, tens of millions. Rembrandt, Vermeer, lost scrolls from the Library of Alexandria. Things people thought were gone forever. And every time I brought something back, I'd see the look on people's faces. Families who'd lost everything in the Holocaust, getting back a painting their grandmother owned. Museums reuniting fragments of history. It meant something. It mattered. But then, he said, his voice hardening, I started noticing things. Pieces I recovered weren't making it to their destinations. Files were being altered. Provenance records changed. I dug deeper, quietly, and found a network. High-level officials, auction houses, private collectors. They were stealing the recovered art and selling it on the black market, hundreds of millions of dollars. And they were using our unit, my work, to legitimize the thefts. Sarah's hands gripped the edge of the chair. What did you do? I gathered evidence, Marcus said. Documents, photographs, recordings, enough to bring down everyone involved. Senators, museum directors, people with power I couldn't even fathom. But before I could go public, they found out. They came for me. Told me if I said anything, I'd disappear. They had resources I couldn't fight, so I made a choice. He stood slowly, walked to the corner of the cabin, and knelt beside the cot. He pulled back a threadbare rug, revealing wooden floorboards. With practiced precision, he pressed on a specific plank, and a section of the floor popped up, revealing a steel handle. Sarah's heart pounded. What is that? Marcus looked at her, his expression grave. The reason I've lived in hiding for 26 years. He pulled the handle and the floor lifted, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Come with me, he said. I'll show you what they tried to bury. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the dark staircase that descended beneath Marcus's cabin. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, each one louder than the last. The air that rose from below was cool and dry, carrying a faint smell of concrete and something else, something she couldn't quite identify. Climate control, maybe. Preservation. Marcus reached into a small cabinet beside the opening and pulled out 2 flashlights. He handed one to Sarah, then began his descent, moving slowly, one hand on the railing that had been bolted into the concrete wall. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before following. Each step echoed in the narrow space, and she could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. The staircase was steep, dropping at least 20 feet into the earth, far deeper than any basement should be. The walls were reinforced concrete, professional grade, nothing like the ramshackle cabin above. At the bottom, Marcus flipped a switch, and the darkness gave way to light. Sarah gasped. Before her stretched an underground vault the size of a small warehouse, maybe 40 feet long and 30 feet wide, with a ceiling height of at least 12 feet. The space was temperature-controlled. She could feel the steady coolness, and dehumidified, the air crisp and perfectly still. But it was what filled the space that stole the breath from her lungs. Paintings, dozens of them, maybe more than 100. They lined the walls in custom-built frames, each one carefully lit, each one protected behind UV-resistant glass. She recognized some of them immediately, not because she was an art expert, but because she'd seen them in textbooks, in documentaries, in lists of the world's most famous missing masterpieces. A Rembrandt self-portrait she'd read about in high school, reported stolen from a private collection in Amsterdam in 1994. A Vermeer interior scene vanished from a museum in Boston in 1990. A Caravaggio that had been cut from its frame in Sicily in 1996. But it wasn't just paintings. Glass cases lined the center of the room, and inside them, Sarah saw illuminated manuscripts, their pages covered in gold leaf and intricate calligraphy. Ancient scrolls preserved in climate-controlled tubes. Small sculptures, bronze and marble, some dating back thousands of years. A jeweled chalice that looked like it belonged in a cathedral. Fragments of frescoes carefully mounted on backing boards. Each piece had a small placard beside it, typed on yellowed paper, listing the item's name, origin, date of theft, and rightful owner. Sarah walked slowly through the vault, her flashlight now unnecessary in the steady glow of the overhead lights. Her fingers trembled as she read the placards. Portrait of a young man, Raphael, stolen from Czartoryski Museum, Krakow, 1939, never recovered. The concert, Vermeer, stolen from Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, Boston, 1990, never recovered. She stopped in front of a painting of a woman in blue, her face turned slightly away, rendered in brushstrokes so delicate they seemed to shimmer. The plaque read, "Woman in blue reading a letter, Vermeer believed destroyed. 1945, survived Allied bombing, recovered 1997. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered, turning to face Marcus. He stood near the staircase, leaning against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "No," he said quietly, "it's very real, and it's been here the whole time." "How?" she asked, her voice rising. "How did you get all of this? How did you hide it? How has nobody found it?" Marcus moved slowly to a desk in the far corner of the vault. It was an old military-style desk, grey steel, with a lamp bolted to the surface. He sat down heavily in the chair and pulled out a thick binder. "This," he said, holding it up, "is a complete inventory. Every piece in this vault, where I found it, how I recovered it, who it belongs to, documentation of the corruption that prevented its return, and evidence of everyone involved in the conspiracy." He opened the binder, and Sarah saw page after page of meticulous notes, photographs, official documents with government seals, shipping manifests, auction records, bank transfers. Everything was cross-referenced, dated, organized with a precision that spoke to decades of careful work. "I spent 15 years recovering these pieces," Marcus said. "From 1981 to 1996. I traveled the world, war zones, black markets, private estates. I was good at my job because I understood people. I could negotiate with warlords and billionaires. I could trace a painting through 6 shell companies and 4 countries. I brought back things people said were lost forever. But every time I recovered something significant, Sarah, every single time, it would disappear before reaching its destination. At first I thought it was incompetence, bureaucratic failure. But then I started noticing patterns. The same names kept appearing in transfer documents. The same auction houses kept acquiring pieces that should have been in museums, so I started keeping copies of everything, secret copies, and I started digging. What I found," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "was a network that went all the way to the top, Department of Defense officials, State Department liaisons, museum directors, even a federal judge. They'd created a system where recovered art would be authenticated through official channels, then quietly diverted to private sales. The pieces would be sold to collectors who didn't ask questions, and the profits would be split among everyone involved. Hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions over the years." Sarah sank into a folding chair near the desk, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. "Why didn't you go to the press? Why didn't you expose them?" "I tried," Marcus said. "In 1997, I contacted 3 different journalists, gave them preliminary evidence. Within 2 weeks, one had been fired. One's house burned down, total loss, all his files destroyed. The third one disappeared, just vanished. Never heard from again. That's when I knew I couldn't fight them directly. They had too much power, too many resources." "So what did you do?" Sarah asked. Marcus stood and walked to one of the paintings, a small portrait of a young girl with dark eyes. "I faked my death," he said. "I'd been working a recovery operation in Prague, tracking a collection stolen from a Jewish family during World War II. I filed a report saying I was following a lead into the mountains. Then I staged an accident, left my credentials, my vehicle, evidence of a fall. The Czech authorities found everything and declared me dead. My body was never recovered because there was no body to recover. I'd been planning it for months. I had money saved, false identification, and I'd already transported the most valuable pieces here to this location. I bought this land under a shell company in 1995, built this vault in 1996, and moved everything here piece by piece. The cabin above is just a shell, a disguise. Everything that matters is down here." Sarah looked around the vault again, seeing it with new eyes. "This isn't just a collection," she said slowly. "This is evidence. This is proof of everything you're saying." "Every piece here," Marcus said, "was supposed to be returned to its rightful owner. Families, museums, governments. And every piece was stolen a second time by people who were supposed to protect it. The monetary value is enormous, yes. Current estimates would put this collection at around $450 million, but the real value is what these pieces represent. History, heritage, memory, things people died trying to protect. He returned to the desk and pulled out another folder, this one filled with photographs. Old photographs, faded and yellowed. He handed them to Sarah. "These are some of the people I met during my recoveries," he said. Sarah flipped through them slowly. An elderly woman in Warsaw holding a small painting of her mother, tears streaming down her face. A rabbi in Jerusalem, cradling a Torah scroll that had survived the Holocaust. A museum curator in Florence, standing beside a restored fresco, his expression one of pure joy. "These moments," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "these were what made the work matter, giving people back pieces of themselves, pieces of their history that they thought were gone forever. And when I realized that work had been corrupted, that those moments were being stolen for profit, I couldn't let it continue. So I took everything. Every piece I'd recovered that hadn't yet been diverted. And I brought them here to wait." "Wait for what?" Sarah asked. "For the right time," Marcus said, "for the right person. For a moment when the truth could be told without being buried." He looked at her directly, his grey eyes intense despite his exhaustion. "I'm dying, Sarah. The doctors gave me 3 months, maybe 4. I don't have time to wait anymore, and I can't take this secret to my grave. These pieces need to go home. The people who stole them need to be exposed. And I need someone I can trust to make that happen." Sarah felt the weight of what he was asking settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. "Marcus, I'm a waitress. I have 2 kids and a GED. I don't know the first thing about art or international law or how to take on powerful people." "You know about right and wrong," Marcus said. "You know about fighting for what matters. You've been doing it your whole life, raising your kids alone, working 2 jobs, never giving up. That's all this requires. Someone who won't give up." "But why me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why not someone with resources, with connections?" "Because everyone with resources has something to lose," Marcus said. "They can be bought, threatened, compromised. You can't. You're not in their world. They won't see you coming. And more than that," he added, his voice softening, "you're kind. You're the only person in this town who treated me like I was still human. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Sarah stood and walked slowly through the vault again, this time really looking at each piece. She stopped in front of a small painting, no bigger than a sheet of paper, showing a mother and child. The placard read, "Madonna and Child, attributed to Da Vinci Workshop, stolen from private collection, Florence, 1943, rightful heirs deceased, to be donated to Uffizi Gallery per family wishes, 1993. She thought about the family who'd owned this, the mother who might have looked at it every day, the children who'd grown up with it, the grandchildren who'd never seen it because it had been stolen, then stolen again. "What would I have to do?" she asked quietly. Marcus returned to the desk and pulled out a laptop, old but functional. "First," he said, "we document everything. Photograph every piece, scan every document, create digital backups, and store them in multiple secure locations. Then we contact people who can help. Art recovery organizations, Holocaust museums, international cultural heritage foundations, journalists who specialize in this kind of investigation. We build a coalition of people who can't be silenced all at once. And then," he continued, "we go public. Press conference, physical evidence, testimony from survivors and descendants. We make it so big, so public, that burying it becomes impossible. The pieces get returned, the conspirators get exposed, and justice, finally, gets served." "It sounds simple when you say it like that," Sarah said. "But it won't be, will it?" "No," Marcus admitted. "They'll come after you, threaten you, try to discredit you, maybe worse. You'll lose your job. People in town will turn against you. Your ex-husband might try to use it against you in custody disputes. You'll be putting everything at risk." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of her children. Emma, 8 years old, with her mother's stubborn streak and her father's quick laugh. Tyler, 6, quiet and thoughtful, who still slept with a stuffed elephant. They were her whole world. Everything she did was for them. But then she thought about the families in those photographs Marcus had shown her. The woman who got her mother's portrait back, the rabbi with his Torah. They had children too, grandchildren, people who deserved to have their heritage returned. And if she walked away, if she let fear stop her, those families would never get that chance. The people who'd stolen from them would win, and men like Marcus, who'd sacrificed everything to do the right thing, would die knowing their work meant nothing. She opened her eyes and looked at Marcus. How do we start? Relief washed over his face, followed quickly by something else. Gratitude. We start with the inventory, he said. I'll teach you everything I know, every piece, every story, every detail. It'll take weeks, maybe months. We don't have months, Sarah said gently. Then we work fast, Marcus replied. They spent the next 3 hours in the vault, Marcus showing Sarah how he'd organized everything, explaining the documentation system, walking her through the authentication records. Some pieces had been verified by multiple experts before Marcus had taken them. Others he'd authenticated himself, using techniques he'd learned over 15 years in the field. He showed her ultraviolet photographs that revealed underpaintings and signatures, X-ray images that confirmed age and technique, chemical analyses of pigments and canvas. It was overwhelming, but Sarah took notes, asked questions, and slowly began to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. As midnight approached, Marcus began to fade. His face had gone pale, and he was leaning heavily on the desk. You need to rest, Sarah said, touching his arm. He nodded reluctantly. Tomorrow, he said. We'll start the digital documentation tomorrow. She helped him up the stairs, supporting his weight as they climbed. The contrast between the vault below and the shabby cabin above was jarring, like stepping from a palace into a prison. At the door, Sarah paused. Marcus, she said, thank you for trusting me. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled. A small, sad smile, but genuine. Thank you, he said, for being trustworthy. Sarah drove home through the darkness, her mind spinning. The dashboard clock read 12:43. Her mother would be asleep, the kids tucked in their beds, dreaming innocent dreams. She pulled into the driveway and sat there for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled, trying to process what she'd just seen, what she'd just agreed to do. $450 million worth of stolen art. A conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. A dying man who'd given up everything to protect the truth. And now it was hers to carry forward. What unfolds next will test every ounce of Sarah's courage, expose corruption that powerful men have killed to conceal, and prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who change history. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. She went inside quietly, checked on the kids, both sleeping peacefully, and then sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee she didn't drink. She pulled out her phone and searched art theft, Isabella Stewart Gardner, Vermeer stolen. The results were staggering. The Gardner Museum heist alone, where thieves had taken 13 pieces in 1990, was considered the biggest art theft in history. The stolen works were valued at over $500 million, and despite a $10 million reward, none had ever been recovered. Except Sarah now knew where at least one of them was. In a vault beneath a hermit's cabin in Montana. She searched more names from the placards she'd seen, painting after painting, sculpture after sculpture, each one on somebody's most wanted list. Interpol, FBI art crime team, international recovery organizations, all searching for pieces that were sitting 20 feet underground, perfectly preserved, meticulously documented. The magnitude of it made her hands shake. This wasn't just big. This was world-changing. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. She dropped the kids at school, kissed them both twice, and drove straight to Marcus's cabin. He was already awake, sitting on his porch despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the plains. "You came back," he said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" she asked. He shrugged. "People get scared in the daylight." What seems possible at midnight feels impossible by morning. Sarah sat beside him. I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'm here. Good, Marcus said. Terror means you understand what we're up against. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. They spent that day and the next 3 photographing every piece in the vault. Marcus had a professional-grade camera with a macro lens, and he taught Sarah how to use it. They documented each painting from multiple angles, capturing signatures, condition issues, frame details. They photographed every page of the manuscripts, every angle of the sculptures. Marcus narrated as they worked, telling her the story of each piece, how he'd found it, where it had been hidden, what it had taken to recover it. There was a Klimt portrait recovered from a basement in Vienna, sealed behind a false wall for 50 years. A Fabergé egg Marcus had traced through 7 different owners before finding it in a vault in Dubai. A collection of ancient Greek coins that had been looted from an archaeological site and scattered across private collections in 3 countries. Each story was its own novel, filled with danger, deception, and determination. Sarah learned that Marcus had been shot twice during his career. Once in Sarajevo in 1994 while recovering artwork from a bombed museum. Once in Cairo in 1996 while intercepting a shipment of looted antiquities. He showed her the scars, faded now but still visible, marks of a life spent in pursuit of something greater than himself. Why risk so much, she asked. For paintings? For objects? They're not just objects, Marcus said. They're proof that beauty survives. That even in the worst moments of human history, people create, preserve, protect. Every piece here represents someone's courage. Someone who hid a painting from the Nazis. Someone who carried a manuscript out of a burning library. Someone who refused to let their heritage be erased. Honoring that courage is worth any risk. By the end of the week, they had over 2,000 photographs and scans of nearly 400 documents. Marcus showed Sarah how to encrypt the files, how to create redundant backups on external drives, how to upload copies to secure cloud storage using anonymous accounts. They worked methodically, checking and rechecking everything, because they both knew they'd only get one chance to do this right. Then came the hard part. Reaching out. Marcus had maintained a few contacts over the years, people he trusted, people who'd helped him in the past and kept his secret. The first was a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a professor of art history at Columbia University and a leading expert on looted Holocaust art. Marcus had worked with her in the 1980s, before everything went wrong. He didn't know if she'd remember him or if she'd believe he was still alive. Sarah sat beside him as he composed the email. Dr. Chen, it began. You may remember me as Marcus Wilhelm, Art Recovery Specialist, Department of Defense, presumed deceased 1997. I am alive and have information regarding the whereabouts of multiple pieces from the Isabella Stewart Gardner theft, the Krakow collection, and over 100 other missing works. I have evidence of a systematic theft and cover-up involving federal officials. I am terminally ill and need assistance in returning these pieces to their rightful owners. If you are willing to help, please respond to this email. Time is critical. Respectfully, Marcus Wilhelm. He read it 3 times before hitting send. Sarah watched the color drain from his face as the email disappeared into the void. What if she doesn't respond? Sarah asked. Then we try someone else, Marcus said. We keep trying until someone listens. The response came 6 hours later. Sarah was making dinner, soup from a can and grilled cheese sandwiches, when Marcus's laptop chimed. He opened the email with trembling hands. Sarah rushed over to read over his shoulder. Marcus, if this is really you, I need proof. Send me a photograph of the Gardner Vermeer and 3 authentication details only you would know. If verified, I will help in any way I can. Elizabeth Chen. Marcus let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 26 years. She remembers, he whispered. She believes me. They went down to the vault immediately, photographed the concert from 3 angles, and Marcus dictated authentication details that he'd never included in any official report. Specific craquelure patterns in the upper left corner, an underpaintment visible only in UV light. A repair made to the canvas in 1762. Details that only someone who'd examined the piece extensively would know. They sent the email. Dr. Chen responded in 40 minutes. My God, Marcus, it's really you, and you have it. You have the Vermeer. Where have you been? What happened? Call me immediately. She included her personal number. Marcus stared at the screen, then at Sarah. This is real now, he said. Once I make this call, there's no going back. Sarah took his hand. Then let's make it count. The conversation with Dr. Chen lasted 2 hours. Sarah listened as Marcus explained everything, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. The conspiracy, the evidence, the vault, the pieces. Dr. Chen asked technical questions, verification questions, and Marcus answered each one without hesitation. Finally, she said, I believe you, Marcus, and I'll help, but you need to understand what you're stepping into. The people you're accusing have infinite resources. They'll destroy you. They'll destroy everyone connected to you. I know, Marcus said, glancing at Sarah. That's why I need to move fast. How fast are we talking? Dr. Chen asked. Marcus looked at Sarah again, and she saw the truth in his eyes. He was dying faster than he'd admitted. Weeks, he said. Maybe days. Then we don't have time for a slow approach, Dr. Chen said. I'll contact the International Council of Museums, the FBI Art Crime Team, and a journalist I trust at the Washington Post. We'll need to authenticate at least 3 pieces independently, preferably the highest value items. Can you transport them? No, Marcus said. I won't risk moving them. Everyone will have to come here. There was a long pause. You're asking international experts to travel to Montana on your word? Dr. Chen asked. I'm asking people who care about the truth to witness it before it's too late, Marcus said. Another pause. Then, give me 48 hours. I'll see who I can rally. The call ended. Sarah and Marcus sat in silence for a long moment. Then Sarah asked the question that had been building in her chest since the moment she stepped into the vault. Are you scared? Marcus considered this. Not of dying, he said. I've made my peace with that. But I'm scared of failing, of dying before this is finished, of these pieces staying buried forever. That won't happen, Sarah said with a conviction she wasn't sure she felt. I won't let it. Over the next 2 days, Marcus received emails from 4 different organizations. Dr. Chen had worked fast. The FBI Art Crime Team wanted to send 2 agents. The Holocaust Museum in Washington wanted to send their chief curator. The International Council of Museums was sending a representative from Paris, and a journalist named David Brennan from the Washington Post wanted an exclusive if the story checked out. All of them would arrive within the week. Marcus and Sarah spent those days preparing. They organized the documentation, created a timeline of the conspiracy, identified the key players who were still alive and active in government and private sectors. Some names made Sarah's stomach turn. A senator currently running for re-election, a museum director who'd been celebrated for his ethical leadership, a federal judge nominated to the Supreme Court 3 years ago. If they went public with this, they wouldn't just be taking on individuals, they'd be challenging institutions. The night before the first visitors were scheduled to arrive, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her children asleep down the hall. What would happen to them if this went wrong? Would they be safe? Would her ex-husband use this chaos to take them from her? Would they grow up ashamed of what their mother had done, or proud? She didn't have answers. All she had was faith that doing the right thing, even when it was terrifying, was the only choice she could live with. The first to arrive was Dr. Elizabeth Chen. She was 63 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a wool coat and practical boots. She pulled up to Marcus's cabin in a rental car, stepped out, and stopped when she saw Marcus standing on the porch. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Dr. Chen walked forward, climbed the steps, and embraced him. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I had to be," Marcus said quietly. "I'm sorry." She pulled back, wiping tears from her eyes. "Don't apologize. Just show me." Marcus led her down into the vault. Sarah followed, watching Dr. Chen's reaction. The professor stopped at the bottom of the stairs, hand over her mouth, tears streaming freely now. "Oh, Marcus," she breathed. "What have you done?" "I saved them," he said simply. "All of them." Dr. Chen walked slowly through the vault, stopping at each piece, examining them with an expert's eye. She spent 20 minutes in front of the concert, studying it from every angle. Then she turned to Marcus. "This is authentic," she said. "I'd stake my career on it." "You already did," Marcus said with a faint smile. 26 years ago. The FBI agents arrived next, Special Agents Morrison and Keyes, both from the art crime team. They were professional, skeptical, and thorough. They examined credentials, provenance documents, and authentication records. They photographed everything, took statements, and called their superiors multiple times. By the end of the day, Agent Morrison looked at Marcus and said, "Sir, if even half of what you're claiming is true, this is the biggest case of art theft and federal corruption in American history." "All of it's true," Marcus said. "Every word." The Holocaust Museum curator, a man named Samuel Rothstein, whose grandparents had died at Auschwitz, broke down when he saw a Torah scroll that had been stolen from a synagogue in Krakow in 1943. "My grandfather was the rabbi there," he said, hands shaking as he touched the glass case. "I have a photograph of him holding this scroll. We thought it was lost forever." "It's not lost," Marcus said gently. "It's going home." By the end of the week, 7 experts had examined the collection. All of them verified the authenticity of the pieces they examined. All of them agreed the documentation was solid, and all of them confirmed that what Marcus had been protecting was nothing short of a miracle, a time capsule of cultural heritage preserved against all odds. But now came the hardest part. Going public, and making sure that when they did, the people responsible couldn't bury the truth again. The plan came together in Marcus's cabin over the course of 3 intense days. 7 experts, 2 FBI agents, 1 investigative journalist, and Sarah crowded into the small space that had once housed only silence and secrets. They sat on folding chairs, on the floor, leaning against walls, laptops balanced on knees, phones pressed to ears, coordinating what Dr. Chen called the most important art recovery revelation in modern history. David Brennan, the Washington Post journalist, was a man in his early 50s with sharp eyes and the kind of weathered face that came from chasing stories into dangerous places. He'd covered war crimes in the Balkans, corruption in South America, and had won a Pulitzer in 2009 for exposing Pentagon fraud. If anyone could handle a story this big without being compromised, Marcus believed it was him. Brennan had spent 2 full days examining the evidence, cross-referencing documents, verifying names and dates. Now he sat at Marcus's small table, his expression grave. "This isn't just a story about stolen art," he said. "This is a story about institutional betrayal at the highest levels. We're talking about people who are currently serving in federal positions, people with the power to make you disappear." He looked directly at Sarah. "Are you absolutely certain you want your name attached to this?" Sarah glanced at Marcus, who sat wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth of the cabin, his face drawn, his breathing labored. He'd deteriorated noticeably over the past week. The cancer was moving faster than anyone had anticipated. She thought about her children, about the risk, about everything she stood to lose. Then she thought about Samuel Rothstein weeping over his grandfather's Torah scroll, about the elderly woman in one of Marcus's photographs, holding her mother's portrait with trembling hands, about all the families who'd lost pieces of their history and deserved to get them back. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm certain. My name goes on this." Brennan nodded with respect. "Then we do this right. We need multiple layers of protection. First, we release the story simultaneously across multiple platforms: Washington Post, New York Times, Guardian in the UK, and at least 3 television networks. They can't suppress all of us at once. Second, we move the most critical evidence off-site before the story breaks. They will come for this vault the moment they know it exists." Agent Morrison, the senior FBI agent, leaned forward. "We can provide federal protection for the collection," he said. "Once this goes public, this becomes an active crime scene and evidence in what will likely be the largest federal investigation in decades. But, he added, looking at Sarah, I can't guarantee your safety. The art crime team can offer witness protection protocols, but the people you're exposing have resources beyond what standard protection can fully counter. I'll take my chances, Sarah said. Dr. Chen, who'd been quiet for most of the meeting, spoke up. We also need to contact the rightful owners or their descendants before the story breaks. They deserve to hear this privately, not from a news report. Some of these families have been searching for these pieces for 70, 80 years. The notification needs to be handled with sensitivity. Marcus, who'd been silent, his energy clearly waning, finally spoke. Elizabeth is right. I have a list. 43 families, 17 museums, 8 governments, all documented, all verified. We reach out to them first, quietly, and let them know their heritage is coming home. His voice cracked slightly. That's what this was always about. Not the money, not the headlines, just giving people back what was stolen from them. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the mission settling over everyone present. Then Brennan cleared his throat. We have one more problem. Timing. If we move too slowly, someone will leak this prematurely, and the targets will have time to cover their tracks, destroy evidence, flee. But if we move too fast, we won't have all our protections in place. We need to find the sweet spot. How long do we have? Dr. Chen asked, looking at Marcus. Marcus met her gaze steadily. 2 weeks, he said. Maybe 3. I can feel it. The cancer's spreading faster. I need to see this through before I can't anymore. Then we move in 10 days, Brennan said decisively. That gives us time to lock down the story, coordinate with international partners, notify the families, and prepare for the firestorm that's coming. Over the next week, Sarah's life became unrecognizable. She still went to work at the diner, still dropped her kids at school, still maintained the appearance of normalcy. But every spare moment was spent at Marcus's cabin, helping coordinate the enormous undertaking they'd set in motion. She learned to encrypt emails, to communicate through secure channels, to verify identities of people she'd never met. Dr. Chen taught her about provenance documentation. Agent Keyes showed her how to catalogue evidence for federal prosecution. Samuel Rothstein walked her through the emotional protocols for notifying families about recovered items. And Marcus, despite his failing body, worked harder than anyone. He spent hours on video calls with descendants of Holocaust victims, his voice gentle as he explained that their families' paintings, their grandmother's jewelry, their father's manuscripts were safe and would be returned. Some people wept. Some were silent, too overwhelmed to speak. One elderly man in Tel Aviv, after learning that his family's Chagall painting had been recovered, said simply, "I can die in peace now. Thank you." Marcus ended that call, closed his laptop, and cried for the first time since Sarah had known him. But not everything went smoothly. 3 days before the planned press conference, Sarah started noticing things. A black sedan parked across from the diner, same car, different spot, 3 days in a row. A man in a suit asking her co-workers questions about her, claiming to be from the health department, though no one could verify it. Her phone making strange clicking sounds during calls. She reported it to Agent Morrison, who ran a sweep and found her phone had been compromised. Someone was listening. "They know," Morrison said grimly. "I don't know how, but someone's caught wind of this." Sarah felt ice run through her veins. "What do we do?" "We accelerate," Morrison said. "We move the press conference up to tomorrow. We go public before they can organize a response." That night, Sarah received a phone call. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. A man's voice, smooth and educated, came through the line. "Miss Donovan, I believe you've gotten yourself involved in something you don't fully understand." "Who is this?" Sarah demanded. "A friend," the voice said. "Someone who'd like to help you avoid making a terrible mistake. The items you think you found, they're not what you believe. They're forgeries, elaborate fakes created by Marcus Wilhelm to justify his theft of federal resources. If you go public with this story, you'll be humiliated. Your children will suffer. Your life will be destroyed." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. Those pieces have been authenticated by 7 independent experts. We have documentation, provenance records, everything. The voice chuckled. Documentation can be fabricated, experts can be mistaken, and federal resources can ensure that the truth, the real truth, is what the public believes. Walk away, Miss Donovan. Take your children and disappear for a while. There's a bank account that's been opened in your name. $500,000. Enough to start over somewhere quiet. All you have to do is step back and let this fade away. Sarah felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce. You're trying to buy my silence. I'm trying to save your life, the voice said, all warmth gone now. These aren't people who make idle threats. Ask Marcus what happened to the journalists who tried to expose this in 1997. Oh wait, you can't. They're dead. Marcus is dying. And if you continue down this path, you'll wish you'd taken the money. The line went dead. Sarah stood there shaking, the phone still pressed to her ear. She immediately called Agent Morrison, who traced the call. Burner phone, he said. Untraceable. But the threat is real, Sarah. They're escalating. We need to move you and your children into protective custody immediately. No, Sarah said. If we hide, we look guilty. We look like we're running because the story isn't solid. We stay visible, we stay strong, and tomorrow we tell the truth. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the house settle, thinking about the voice on the phone. $500,000. More money than she'd see in 10 years of waitressing. Enough to give her kids everything they needed. College funds, a real house, security. All she had to do was walk away. Let Marcus's secret die with him. Let the stolen art stay buried. Let the powerful men who'd profited from theft and corruption continue their lives undisturbed. But then she thought about something Marcus had said. Every piece here represents someone's courage. Someone who hid a painting from the Nazis. Someone who carried a manuscript out of a burning library. Someone who refused to let their heritage be erased. If those people could risk everything to protect beauty and truth, how could she do any less? She got out of bed, went to her children's room, and watched them sleep. Emma curled around her stuffed rabbit. Tyler sprawled across his mattress like he was making snow angels. She kissed each of their foreheads and whispered, I'm doing this for you, so you grow up in a world where the truth matters. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Crestfall Community Center, the only venue in town large enough to hold what they anticipated would be significant media presence. By 8 a.m., news vans were already arriving. By 9, the parking lot was full. National networks, international correspondents, journalists from art publications, legal analysts, everyone had come. Brennan's story had been released at 6 a.m. simultaneously across 4 major publications, and the world was reacting. Inside the community center, Sarah stood backstage with Marcus, who was seated in a wheelchair now, too weak to stand for long periods. Dr. Chen was reviewing her presentation, a technical explanation of the authentication process. Agent Morrison was coordinating security with local police, and Brennan was fielding calls from his editors, managing the media frenzy that was building by the minute. Marcus reached for Sarah's hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. Thank you, he said quietly, for believing an old hermit, for having the courage I lost for too many years. You never lost it, Sarah said, squeezing his hand gently. You just had to wait for the right moment. This is that moment. At exactly 10 a.m., they walked out onto the stage. The room erupted with camera flashes and shouted questions. Sarah had never experienced anything like it. The noise was overwhelming, disorienting. But then she saw faces in the crowd. Samuel Rothstein sitting in the front row, tears already streaming down his face. A woman who'd flown in from Poland, whose family's collection had been part of what Marcus recovered. A young man from Amsterdam who'd spent his entire adult life searching for his grandmother's paintings. They weren't there for the spectacle. They were there for closure. Agent Morrison spoke first, delivering a brief statement about the FBI's involvement and the scope of the investigation they were launching. Then Dr. Chen presented the authentication findings, using slides that showed UV photographs, X-ray analyses, and comparative studies. The evidence was irrefutable. These pieces were genuine. Then it was Marcus's turn. Sarah wheeled him to the microphone. The room fell silent. For 26 years, Marcus began, his voice surprisingly strong. I've lived in hiding. People called me crazy, a hermit, a ghost. They weren't wrong. I became a ghost because the alternative was death. I uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. I recovered artwork worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I watched as it was stolen a second time by the very people tasked with protecting it. He paused, letting that sink in. I have evidence. Names, dates, bank transfers, shipping manifests, recordings of conversations, everything you need to understand the scope of this corruption. And I have 137 pieces of stolen art, all authenticated, all documented, all ready to be returned to their rightful owners. The room erupted with questions, but Marcus raised a hand. I'm dying, he said bluntly. Cancer, stage 4. I have weeks at most. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking for justice, for the families who lost everything, for the museums that were robbed, for the history that was nearly erased. These pieces are going home, and the people who tried to profit from their theft are going to answer for what they've done. Then Sarah stepped to the microphone. The cameras swung to her, and she felt her stomach clench with nerves. My name is Sarah Donovan, she said. I'm a waitress, a single mother, nobody important. But Marcus trusted me with this secret because he knew I'd fight for what's right. Last night someone called me. They offered me $500,000 to walk away. They threatened my children. They told me the people we're exposing are too powerful to challenge. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. I'm here anyway, because some things matter more than money or safety. Truth matters. Justice matters. Making sure that families who suffered unimaginable losses get back even a small piece of what was stolen from them, that matters. The room was silent now, every eye on her. So to whoever called me last night, she continued, her voice steady. You underestimated the wrong person. I'm not walking away. I'm not backing down. And neither is anyone else in this room. The press conference lasted 3 hours. Journalists asked questions. Dr. Chen provided technical details. Agent Morrison outlined the federal investigation, and one by one, descendants of the original owners came to the microphone to share what these recovered pieces meant to them. A woman whose grandfather's Matisse had been stolen from their Paris apartment in 1942. A man whose family's ancient manuscripts had been looted from a monastery in Greece. Each story was a knife to the heart, a reminder of the human cost behind every stolen object. By the time it ended, the story had gone viral. It was trending on every social media platform. Cable news was running it non-stop. International media was picking it up. The names Marcus had documented, the senator, the museum director, the judge, were already issuing denials, calling it a hoax, claiming the evidence was fabricated. But the public wasn't buying it. The authentication was too solid, the documentation too detailed, the emotional testimony too real. That afternoon, the first domino fell. The museum director announced his immediate retirement, citing health reasons. By evening, the senator's office released a statement saying he was cooperating fully with federal investigators. By midnight, the judge had recused himself from all pending cases and hired a criminal defense attorney. They were running scared, and Sarah knew that meant they were about to fight back hard. The retaliation came faster than anyone anticipated. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the diner for her shift and found a termination notice taped to the door, effective immediately, no explanation. When she called the owner, he stammered an apology. I got calls, Sarah. People I can't say no to. They said if I kept you employed, they'd shut me down. Find health violations, tax irregularities. I'm sorry, I can't risk it. By afternoon, her landlord had delivered an eviction notice, violation of lease terms, it claimed, though it listed no specific violations. Her bank called to inform her that her accounts had been flagged for suspicious activity and were being frozen pending investigation. Her ex-husband's lawyer filed an emergency custody motion, claiming she was engaging in reckless behavior that endangered the children. Sarah sat in her car outside the school, waiting to pick up Emma and Tyler, and felt the walls closing in. They were dismantling her life piece by piece, methodically destroying everything she'd built. Her phone rang. Agent Morrison. "We anticipated this," he said. "It's a pressure campaign. They're trying to isolate you, make you vulnerable, force you to recant. Don't let them win." "I'm losing everything," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "My job, my home, maybe my kids. How do I not let them win when they're taking everything that matters?" "You fight back," Morrison said. "We've got lawyers ready to challenge the eviction, civil rights attorneys who'll take the employment case pro bono, and family court advocates who specialize in cases like this. You're not alone, Sarah. We've got you." But that night, alone in her apartment, packing boxes because the eviction would be enforced in 72 hours, regardless of legal challenges, Sarah felt very alone. She looked at the photographs on her wall. Emma's school picture, Tyler's drawing of their family, her parents, long gone, smiling from a faded Polaroid. She thought about calling the number from the threatening call, accepting the money, making it all stop. Then her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She almost deleted it, but curiosity made her open it. It was a photograph. The elderly man from Tel Aviv, the one whose Chagall painting had been recovered, standing in front of the piece that had been returned to him that morning. His arms were spread wide, touching the frame like he was embracing a long-lost family member. Tears streamed down his face, but he was smiling. The caption read, "Because of you, I can die complete. Thank you for your courage." Sarah stared at the photo for a long moment, then wiped her eyes and went back to packing. They could take her job. They could take her apartment. They could make her life hell. But they couldn't take away what she'd helped accomplish. They couldn't undo the returns that were already happening, and they couldn't silence a truth that had already been told to the world. The next week was chaos. Federal investigators raided offices in Washington, New York, and Chicago. Subpoenas were issued. Bank accounts were frozen, not Sarah's anymore, but those belonging to the conspirators. Arrests were made. Minor players at first, mid-level officials who'd facilitated the thefts, but the investigation was climbing the ladder. Every day brought new revelations. Documents that had been shredded were being reconstructed. Witnesses were coming forward. People who'd been too scared to speak for decades were finally talking. And through it all, Marcus was fading. Sarah visited him every day, bringing updates, showing him photos of pieces being returned to their owners. He'd smile weakly, squeeze her hand and whisper, "We did it. We actually did it." 10 days after the press conference, Sarah arrived at the cabin to find an ambulance in the driveway. Paramedics were loading Marcus onto a stretcher. He'd collapsed that morning, unable to get out of bed. Dr. Chen was there, her face streaked with tears. "He's asking for you," she told Sarah. Sarah climbed into the ambulance and took Marcus's hand. His eyes opened, clouded with pain and medication, but still aware. "The Vermeer," he whispered. "It's going back to Boston next week." "I know," Sarah said, tears flowing freely now. "I saw the news. The museum's planning a whole ceremony." "Good," Marcus breathed. "That's good." He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "Sarah, promise me something. Anything," she said. "Promise me you'll finish this. All the pieces, all the families. Don't let them bury it again." "I promise," Sarah said, gripping his hand tighter. "I swear on my children's lives, Marcus, every piece goes home." He smiled, a real smile, and for a moment he looked younger, lighter, like a burden he'd carried for decades had finally been lifted. Then his eyes closed, and he slipped into unconsciousness. He never woke up again. Marcus Wilhelm died 3 days later in Crestfall Memorial Hospital, with Sarah and Dr. Chen at his bedside. He was 68 years old. He'd spent 26 years in hiding, protecting a secret that could have made him rich, but instead made him a target. And in his final weeks, he'd exposed one of the greatest conspiracies in art world history. The funeral was small, just Sarah, her children, Dr. Chen, Agent Morrison, Samuel Rothstein, and a handful of others whose lives Marcus had touched. But outside the chapel, nearly 200 people stood in the cold, descendants of families whose art had been recovered, museum curators whose collections were being restored, journalists who'd covered the story. They came to honor a man they'd never met, a man their town had called crazy, a man who turned out to be a hero. Sarah stood at the podium and spoke simply. Marcus Wilhelm was called a hermit, a recluse, a crazy old man, she said. But he was none of those things. He was a guardian, a protector, a man who sacrificed everything, his career, his identity, his life, to do what was right. We owe him more than we can ever repay. But we can honor him by finishing what he started, by making sure every piece finds its way home, by making sure the truth he died protecting stays alive. As they lowered Marcus into the ground, snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the earth in white. Sarah stood there long after everyone else had left, her children huddled close, and made a silent promise to the man who'd trusted her with his secret. This isn't over, she thought, not until every piece is returned, not until justice is served, not until your sacrifice means something that lasts. And she meant every word. The snow fell heavier the day after Marcus's funeral, blanketing Crestfall in a white silence that felt both peaceful and suffocating. Sarah stood in the cabin that had become as familiar to her as her own home, staring at the entrance to the vault below. The federal agents had catalogued everything, photographed every angle, documented every piece for the investigation. But the collection remained here, in Marcus's vault, protected under 24-hour guard until each item could be properly returned. Dr. Chen had stayed in town, unwilling to leave until the process was complete. She found Sarah in the cabin that morning, sitting at Marcus's old desk, surrounded by files and photographs. "You don't have to do this alone," Dr. Chen said gently, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Yes, I do," Sarah replied. "I promised him. And Marcus kept his promises. I need to keep mine." The custody hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. Sarah's ex-husband, Derek, had filed an emergency motion claiming she was mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and exposing their children to dangerous elements. His lawyer had painted a picture of a woman who'd abandoned rational thought to chase conspiracy theories with a delusional hermit. Never mind that the conspiracy had been proven true. Never mind that federal indictments were being handed down weekly. In family court, perception mattered more than facts. Sarah sat in the courthouse wearing her only good dress, the one she'd bought at Goodwill 3 years ago for parent-teacher conferences. Across the aisle, Derek sat in a new suit, his girlfriend beside him, both looking polished and stable, and exactly like the kind of people a judge would trust with children. Sarah's lawyer, provided pro bono through a civil rights organization Dr. Chen had connected her with, was young and earnest but clearly outmatched by Derek's expensive attorney. The hearing lasted 2 hours. Derek's lawyer presented evidence of Sarah's job loss, her eviction, the frozen bank accounts. They showed screenshots of threatening social media posts directed at Sarah, claiming she was putting her children in danger by staying in the public eye. They called a child psychologist who testified without ever meeting Emma or Tyler that children exposed to high-stress situations often suffered developmental trauma. Then it was Sarah's turn. Her lawyer called Agent Morrison to testify about Sarah's cooperation with federal investigators and the legitimacy of the case she'd helped expose. He called Dr. Chen, who spoke about Sarah's intelligence, her dedication, her moral courage. He called Sarah's former manager at the diner, who admitted she'd been fired under pressure, but was one of the best employees he'd ever had. And finally, he called Sarah herself. She took the stand with shaking hands, but a steady voice. The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and silver hair, looked at her with an expression Sarah couldn't read. "Miss Donovan," Derek's lawyer began, standing with theatrical precision, "isn't it true that you've lost your employment, your housing, and your financial stability all within the span of 2 weeks?" "Yes," Sarah answered. "Because you chose to involve yourself in a situation that any reasonable person would have avoided?" "No," Sarah said firmly, "because powerful people are trying to punish me for telling the truth." The lawyer smirked. The truth, or the delusions of a dying man? Sarah felt anger flash through her chest. Marcus Wilhelm recovered 137 pieces of stolen art worth $450 million. 7 independent experts authenticated them. The FBI has opened one of the largest federal investigations in history based on evidence he preserved. That's not delusion. That's heroism. And surely, the lawyer continued, you understand that heroism doesn't pay rent or feed children? Sarah looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I grew up poor. I've been poor my entire adult life. I've worked 2 jobs, survived on 4 hours of sleep, stretched every dollar until it screamed. I know how to provide for my children under impossible circumstances. What I won't do is teach them that staying silent in the face of injustice is acceptable. I won't show them that you can be bought, that the right thing to do is whatever keeps you safe and comfortable. She felt tears building, but refused to let them fall. My children are watching what their mother does in this moment, and I want them to see someone who stands up when it matters, even when it costs everything. Because that's the parent I want to be, not the one who teaches them that truth is negotiable. The courtroom was silent. Derek's lawyer looked less confident. The judge made notes, her expression still unreadable. After both sides rested, the judge took a brief recess. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. When she returned, Sarah gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. I've reviewed the evidence presented, the judge began, and I've considered the arguments from both parties. Mr. Donovan, your concerns about stability are noted. However, temporary financial hardship, especially hardship that results from cooperation with federal law enforcement, does not constitute grounds for emergency custody modification. She looked at Sarah. Miss Donovan, you're clearly facing extraordinary circumstances. But nothing presented today suggests your children are in immediate danger or that you're unfit as a parent. The emergency motion is denied. Custody remains as previously ordered. Sarah felt her lungs expand for what felt like the first time in hours. Derek's face went red. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but it was over. Her children were still hers. Outside the courthouse, Sarah sat on the cold stone steps and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from relief, so profound it hurt. Dr. Chen found her there 20 minutes later and sat beside her without saying a word. They sat together in silence as snow continued to fall. 2 women who'd become unlikely allies in a fight neither had expected to join. That evening, Sarah received an email that changed everything. It was from a foundation she'd never heard of, the Wilhelm Memorial Fund for Art Repatriation and Truth. The message explained that the fund had been established by anonymous donors, people moved by Marcus's story and Sarah's courage, to ensure that the work of returning the stolen pieces could continue and that Sarah would have the resources to see it through. The fund was offering her a position as executive director, with a salary of $75,000 per year, full benefits, and a housing stipend. Her job would be to coordinate the return of every piece in Marcus's collection, to work with families and museums, to tell the stories of the recovered art, and to ensure that Marcus's legacy lived on. Sarah read the email 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. Then she called the number listed at the bottom. The woman who answered introduced herself as Margaret Sutton, a retired museum director and one of the fund's board members. "This is real, Miss Donovan," Margaret said warmly. "We've raised over $2 million in the past week alone. People want to help. They want to be part of returning these pieces, and they want you to lead that effort." "But I'm not qualified," Sarah protested. "I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about museums or international law." "You know about fighting for what's right," Margaret said. "You know about keeping promises, and you have something no degree can teach, moral authority. You stood beside Marcus when everyone else called him crazy. You risked everything to tell the truth. That's the qualification that matters most." Sarah accepted the position that night. Within a week, she'd moved into a small house provided by the fund, nothing fancy, but warm and safe, with bedrooms for Emma and Tyler and a small office where she could work. The eviction was nullified. Her bank accounts were unfrozen once investigators confirmed the fraud, and slowly, piece by piece, her life began to reassemble itself. But the real work was just beginning. Each of the 137 pieces in Marcus's collection had a story, and each story required research, documentation, and sensitive coordination with families who'd waited decades for this moment. Sarah worked 12-hour days, learning as she went, guided by Dr. Chen and a team of experts the fund had assembled. They started with the highest-profile pieces. The concert by Vermeer was returned to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston in a ceremony attended by thousands. The museum's director wept as the painting was unveiled, carefully hung in the same empty frame that had waited for it since 1990. Sarah stood at the back of the crowd, watching, and felt Marcus's presence so strongly it was like he was standing beside her. Next came the Rembrandt self-portrait, returned to a private foundation in Amsterdam that had been searching for it since 1994. Then the Klimt, the Caravaggio, the Chagall. Each return was its own event, its own moment of healing. But the most powerful returns were the ones that didn't make headlines, like the small watercolor painting recovered from a family in Munich. It had belonged to a Jewish family that owned a bookshop before the war. The Nazis had seized everything in 1938, and the family had fled to Argentina. The granddaughter, now in her 70s, flew to Montana to see the painting in person before it was shipped to her home in Buenos Aires. Sarah met her at the vault, and they descended together. When the woman saw the painting, a simple scene of a garden with a bench, she collapsed to her knees. "My grandmother painted this," she whispered. "She painted it in our garden the summer before everything changed. I've only seen it in photographs. My whole life I thought it was gone." She reached out and touched the frame with trembling fingers. "She's here. I can feel her. She's still here." Sarah knelt beside her, and they cried together, two strangers connected by loss and recovery, by theft and return, by the invisible threads that tie us to the past. These moments happened again and again. A Torah scroll returned to a synagogue in Poland, where the current rabbi was the great-nephew of the rabbi who'd hidden it from the Nazis. Ancient Greek coins returned to a museum in Athens, reuniting a collection that had been scattered for 70 years. A manuscript returned to a monastery in Armenia, where monks had prayed for its return every day for 3 decades. Each return was a small miracle. Each one proved that Marcus had been right. Beauty survives, and giving it back matters more than any price tag. But while Sarah worked to heal the past, the present was still fighting back. The federal investigation had expanded dramatically. 23 people had been indicted so far, including the senator, the museum director, and the judge. But there were bigger fish, people whose names Marcus had documented but who had enough power to slow-walk the investigation, to hide behind layers of lawyers and classified information. The pressure on Sarah intensified. She received death threats weekly, vicious messages describing in detail what would happen to her and her children. Someone spray-painted "liar" across the front of her new house. A brick was thrown through her office window. The fund hired private security, 2 former Secret Service agents who accompanied Sarah everywhere. Emma and Tyler's school hired additional safety personnel. The kids were scared, confused about why their mom was suddenly famous and why people were angry. One night, Tyler climbed into Sarah's bed, his stuffed elephant clutched to his chest. "Mama," he said quietly, "why do people hate you?" Sarah pulled him close, choosing her words carefully. "They don't hate me, sweetheart. They hate that I told the truth about something they wanted to keep hidden. People did bad things, and I helped show the world what they did. Sometimes, when people are caught doing bad things, they get angry at the person who caught them instead of being sorry for what they did." "But you didn't do anything bad," Tyler said. "No," Sarah agreed. "I did something right, and sometimes doing the right thing makes people who do wrong things very upset." Tyler thought about this. "Like when I told the teacher that Marcus was cheating on the test and Marcus got mad at me?" "Exactly like that," Sarah said, kissing the top of his head. "Exactly like that." 6 months after Marcus's death, the final major piece was ready for return. It was the Raphael, portrait of a young man, stolen from the Czartoryski Museum in Krakow in 1939 by the Nazis and never recovered. It was considered one of the most important lost artworks of World War II. The Polish government had searched for it for 86 years. And now, thanks to Marcus, it was going home. The return ceremony was held in Krakow, and Sarah was invited as the guest of honor. she brought Emma and Tyler, wanting them to understand why the past year of chaos and fear had been necessary. They flew to Poland, Sarah's first time ever leaving the United States, and were treated like dignitaries. The president of Poland met with them personally, thanking Sarah for her courage and honoring Marcus's memory. The ceremony took place in the museum's Grand Hall, beneath vaulted ceilings painted with frescoes that had survived wars and occupations and time itself. Over 1,000 people attended: government officials, museum directors, Holocaust survivors, art historians, journalists from around the world. But the most important person there was a man named Piotr Czartoryski, 92 years old, the last surviving member of the family that had owned the painting. He sat in the front row, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the covered frame at the center of the stage. When the cover was removed and the Raphael was revealed, the room erupted in applause. But Piotr didn't clap. He just stared, tears streaming down his weathered face. After the official speeches, Sarah approached him. Through a translator, she said, "Mr. Czartoryski, Marcus Wilhelm spent his life protecting this painting so it could come home to you." Piotr looked at her with eyes that had seen too much history. Then he spoke, his voice thin but clear. The translator relayed his words. "When the Nazis took this painting from my family's palace, I was 6 years old. I watched them load it onto a truck. My mother told me to remember it, to carry it in my heart, because we might never see it again. I am 92 now. I have carried that painting in my heart for 86 years. And today, finally, I can let it go, because it is home." He reached out and took Sarah's hand. "Tell your friend Marcus, when you speak to him in your prayers, that he gave me the greatest gift an old man could receive. He gave me completion. He gave me peace." Sarah couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears blurring her vision. That night, she stood on the balcony of her hotel room, looking out over the city of Krakow, its ancient buildings lit against the night sky. She thought about Marcus, about his cramped cabin and his secret vault, about the life he'd sacrificed to protect these pieces. And she understood, finally, why he'd done it. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the art. It was about refusing to let theft and corruption win, about believing that even one person could make a difference if they were stubborn enough, brave enough, and willing to sacrifice enough. Marcus had been that person, and now, somehow, so was she. The investigation continued to unfold over the following year. The evidence Marcus had preserved proved devastating to those he'd named. The senator was convicted on 17 counts of fraud and conspiracy, sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. The museum director pleaded guilty to avoid trial and received 12 years. The judge was disbarred and convicted, sentenced to 15 years. Dozens of others, auction house executives, government officials, private collectors, faced charges. The total amount of money recovered from seized assets exceeded $700 million, funds that would be used to compensate victims and support art recovery efforts worldwide. But more importantly, the system that had allowed the corruption changed. New oversight protocols were implemented for recovered cultural property. International agreements were strengthened. Museums developed stricter provenance requirements. Marcus's exposure of the conspiracy had forced an entire industry to reform itself. And Sarah became the face of that reform. She traveled the world, speaking at conferences, consulting with governments, helping other families search for lost heritage. The Wilhelm Memorial Fund grew into a major foundation, supporting art recovery efforts globally. Sarah hired a staff of 12, including Agent Morrison, who retired from the FBI to become the fund's Director of Investigations, and Dr. Chen, who served as Chief Authentication Officer. Emma and Tyler grew up watching their mother turn tragedy into purpose. Emma, now 10, started a school project documenting families who'd recovered lost artwork, interviewing them about what it meant to get pieces of their history back. Tyler, 8, became fascinated with art history, spending hours looking at books about Renaissance painting and ancient sculptures. They understood now why their mother had fought so hard, why the risk had been necessary. 2 years after Marcus's death, the final piece from his collection was returned. It was a small thing, a silver mezuzah that had been stolen from a family in Vienna in 1938. The family line had been nearly wiped out in the Holocaust, but a single great-great-granddaughter had survived, living quietly in London. She was 47 years old, a schoolteacher named Rebecca, and she'd never known the mezuzah existed until Sarah tracked her down. They met at the vault, which had been preserved as a memorial and educational site. Rebecca descended the stairs slowly, overwhelmed by the space, by the history contained within it. Sarah showed her the mezuzah, resting in a simple box lined with velvet. It was small, tarnished, inscribed with Hebrew prayers. Rebecca picked it up with shaking hands. "This hung on my family's doorpost," she whispered. "My great-great-grandmother would have touched this every day, every single day." She closed her fingers around it. "I'm the only one left, the only one who survived. And now I have this piece of them." She looked at Sarah with gratitude that needed no words. That evening, as Sarah locked up the memorial site, she realized something profound. The vault was empty now. Every piece had found its way home. Marcus's mission was complete. She stood in the center of the empty space, remembering the first time she descended these stairs, remembering her shock and fear and wonder. She thought about the journey from that night to this one, the press conference, the threats, the custody battle, the returns, the healing. She thought about Marcus, and how a man everyone had dismissed as crazy had turned out to be the sanest person in town, how his small cabin had held a secret that changed the world, how one person's refusal to give up had sparked a movement that was still growing. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the voice recorder app. She did this sometimes, recording messages to Marcus, even though he'd never hear them. It helped her process, helped her feel like he was still part of the journey. "Hey, Marcus," she said softly, her voice echoing in the empty vault. "We did it. Every piece is home, every single one. You were right about everything, about the corruption, about the power of truth, about people caring if they're given the chance to see what matters." She paused, emotion thick in her throat. "Pyotr Czartoryski, the man who got the Raphael back, he asked me to tell you something. He said you gave him completion. And I think somehow you gave that to all of us, to the families who got their heritage back, to the people who learned they could stand up to power, to me, who learned I was stronger than I thought." She wiped tears from her cheeks. "I miss you. I wish you could see what your courage created, but I think maybe you can. I hope you can. And I hope you're proud. I hope you're finally at peace." She ended the recording and stood in silence for a long moment. Then she climbed the stairs, turned off the lights, and locked the vault for the final time. Above ground, the Montana plains stretched endlessly under a sky full of stars. The cabin stood small and humble against that vastness, just as it always had. But Sarah saw it differently now. Not as a hermit's hiding place, but as a guardian's post. A place where one man had stood watch over beauty and truth for 26 years, waiting for the moment when the world would be ready to listen. That moment had come. And because of Marcus's patience and Sarah's courage, 137 pieces of stolen heritage had found their way home. $450 million worth of art had been returned. 23 criminals had been brought to justice, and countless families had received the closure they'd sought for generations. But more than that, something else had changed. The world had learned that ordinary people could do extraordinary things, that a waitress and a hermit could take on the most powerful institutions and win. That truth, even when buried for decades, could still surface. That justice, even when delayed, could still arrive. And that sometimes the quietest voices carried the most power. Sarah walked to her car, where Emma and Tyler waited, and drove them home through the darkness. Tomorrow, she'd start planning the next phase of the Foundation's work. There were other collections out there, other families searching, other truths waiting to be uncovered. The work would continue. But tonight, she just wanted to be a mother, to make her kids dinner and help with homework, and tuck them in with stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Because that's what they were, what Marcus had been, what she'd become. Not heroes in capes or legends in history books, just people who'd seen something wrong and refused to look away. People who'd been given a choice between safety and chosen truth, even when it cost everything. People who understood that some things, beauty, heritage, justice, were worth protecting, no matter the price. 3 years after Marcus's death, the cabin and vault were officially designated as a National Historic Site. The small, weathered structure that had once housed mockery and isolation now welcomed thousands of visitors each year. School groups came to learn about art recovery and the importance of cultural heritage. Families who'd received pieces back came to pay their respects. Students studying museum ethics and provenance research came to understand how one man's courage had changed an entire field. Sarah stood at the dedication ceremony, watching as the bronze plaque was unveiled. It read, Marcus Wilhelm, 1957 to 2025. Guardian of heritage, protector of truth, proof that one person's courage can change the world. The crowd applauded, but Sarah barely heard it. She was thinking about the first time she'd met Marcus, broken down on the side of the road in a snowstorm, and how a simple act of kindness had led to all of this. She thought about the night he'd shown her the vault, his hands trembling as he revealed a secret he'd carried for decades. She thought about his final days, how he'd worked until he physically couldn't anymore, how he'd died knowing his life's work would continue. And she thought about her own transformation, from a struggling waitress to the director of an international foundation, from someone who felt powerless to someone who'd helped bring down a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. The mayor of Crestfall approached her after the ceremony. Miss Donovan, he said, shaking her hand, on behalf of the town, I want to apologize. We were wrong about Marcus. We were wrong to dismiss him, to mock him, to treat him like he didn't matter. Sarah looked at the man who'd once crossed the street to avoid Marcus. I appreciate that, she said, but Marcus didn't do this for recognition. He did it because it was right. The apology he would have wanted isn't to him. It's to everyone you've ever dismissed because they didn't fit your idea of what mattered. The mayor nodded, chastened. Point taken. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah stayed behind, standing in front of the cabin one more time. Dr. Chen joined her, the two women standing in comfortable silence. Do you think he knew, Dr. Chen finally asked, that it would turn out like this? Sarah considered the question. I think he hoped, she said. I think that's all he allowed himself. Hope that someday someone would listen, someone would care, someone would finish what he started. She smiled softly. I'm just glad I got to be that someone. They stood together as the sun set over the Montana plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. The cabin stood silhouetted against that magnificent backdrop, no longer a symbol of isolation, but a monument to persistence, to integrity, to the unshakable belief that truth matters, and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they're willing to try. Anyone can change the world if they're brave enough to stand when others sit, speak when others silence, and believe when others doubt. As the lights of Crestfall appeared on the horizon, Sarah Donovan, former waitress, single mother, and now guardian of Marcus Wilhelm's legacy, allowed herself a small smile. The hermit everyone mocked had been right all along, and the nobody from Montana who believed him had helped prove that truth can't stay buried forever. Because for Sarah, for Marcus, and for every family who received a piece of their heritage back, this was never about the money. It was never about fame. It was about something far more valuable. The knowledge that even in a world run by powerful men with dark secrets, one person with courage could still tip the balance toward light. And sometimes that one person started by simply stopping to help a crying stranger in the snow. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering the extraordinary in the ordinary. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that truth, no matter how long buried, deserves to be brought into the light.